The Holy Gospel according to Luke. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This, the first registration, took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. In that region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. The angel of God stood before them, and the glory of God shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all the people. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find a child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace among those whom God favors." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. But Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen as it had been told them. This is the gospel of Christ. Please be seated. Christmas Eve is indeed a holy night, a night when distinctions between the sacred and the ordinary fall away, and we are able to see beyond the boundaries which limit our vision. On this holy night, if we look closely, we can see visions of the love which is the source of all reality, the love that many of us call God. The best way to see beyond the boundaries which limit our vision is through story. The fellow whose birth we celebrate was particularly fond of revealing truth through stories. Jesus would often tell a new story alongside a familiar sacred story in order to reveal unseen truths within the familiar. So on this holy night, I'll tell you a new story, in the hope that we might see once again the truth revealed in the stories that our ancestors used to tell about the birth of Jesus. Not so very long ago, a young woman, let's call her Dora, short for Dorothea, which comes from the Greek phrase, gift from God. Dora spent most of her childhood dreading Christmas. Christmas in Dora's family was a volatile affair. Dora's father never needed much of an excuse to drink far too much. And so most of the holidays were consumed by the fallout from his excessive drinking. After far too many devastating Christmas Eves, which ended in tears, Dora figured out that the best thing she could do to protect herself from the trauma of her family's gatherings was to stay away from home on Christmas Eve. Fortunately, Dora was blessed with friends from church who regularly welcomed her into their home each Christmas Eve. Beth and Michael had 3 small children, the youngest of which was little Sophia, who was also Dora's goddaughter. With her family of choice, Dora knew exactly what to expect from Christmas Eve. There was no trauma. First, there'd be a trip out into the woods to find the perfect Christmas tree, which they would trim together before sitting down to a traditional feast, followed by Michael's dramatic reading of the Christmas story from the Gospel of Luke. When the children were safely tucked into bed with dreams of, well, not so much sugar plums dancing in their heads, but rather visions of packages which would magically arrive whilst they slept, Dora and Beth would slip out quietly to attend the Christmas Eve candlelight communion service. Well, one Christmas Eve, Dora found herself alone in the house, trying to amuse her goddaughter, Sophia, who was really very unhappy. Her parents had decided that the unusually cold weather, together with the deep snow, were too severe for a 3-year-old to trudge through. Sophia and Dora were given the task of getting the living room ready to receive the Christmas tree. Sophia was not pleased, not at all happy about being left behind. But it didn't take long for the boxes of decorations to capture her attention. All through the Advent season, little Sophia had been learning the Christmas story. As they tackled the sorting out of the decorations, Sophia began to regale Dora with her own version of the Christmas story. As they unpacked the shepherds, wise guys, and angels, little Sophia told Dora how once upon a time, before they had picture books or TVs, there wasn't anything fun to do because there was no Santa to bring anybody any presents. And there weren't any cars, so Mary, who was going to have a baby, had to ride on a donkey, and Joseph walked because he had longer legs, and they walked all day long until it was dark. And then when they got where they were going, they were very, very hungry, but there wasn't any food, so they went into a stable where they talked to the animals until they weren't hungry anymore. It was dark, but they weren't afraid because there was a big star shining up in the sky so they could see everything that was happening. And soon it was time for a big surprise, but not the kind of surprise that Santa brings. It was a really big surprise, and Sophia's eyes lit up as she told Dora about this big surprise. She said, when the animals fell asleep, then the baby was born. Sophia asked Dora, do you know who the baby was? And Dora played along, asking, tell me, who was the baby who was born? Sophia climbed up onto her lap and whispered into Dora's ear, the baby was God. With that, Sophia jumped down and began to dance around the room. Rarely is the good news told with such earnest appreciation for such an amazing surprise. And when the huge pine tree was finally trimmed to a size that would actually fit into the living room, they all set about the task of decorating. But it wasn't exactly the idyllic scene that Dora had imagined it would be. Sophia and her slightly older brother and sister fought over who put what where on the tree, and things went downhill from there. Sophia was not impressed when her older brother gleefully told her the details of the Christmas menu. The idea of roast goose with all the trimmings was outrageous to little Sophia, who only knew one goose, and she went by the name of Mother Goose. How dare they cook a goose, let alone eat it? Sophia refused to eat anything at all, even though her father told her that lots and lots of people eat geese at Christmas time. After the rest of the family had filled themselves without any remorse at all, they settled down in the living room expecting Michael to read the Christmas story. But that year, Michael suggested that old Zeb should read the story. Zeb was an old duffer who lived down the road. He was in his 90s and had no family of his own. Zeb didn't get out much anymore, so Michael had collected him in the afternoon so that he could watch the kids decorate the tree. And no one had the heart to take him back to his lonely house, so Zeb stayed for dinner. Goose was, in Zeb's opinion, the finest of Christmas feasts. Zeb carefully read the gospel story, then stuck around as the children opened just one of their gifts before heading off to bed. And Beth and Dora began to get ready to go to church. Dora was just putting on her coat when little Sophia came bouncing down the stairs, dressed in her Sunday best. And Dora asked Sophia where she thought she was going, and little Sophia didn't miss a beat when she said, "It's time for church. It's Christmas. It's time for church." Her mother told her it was time for her to go to bed. Undeterred, Sophia asked Dora to help her find her shoes. Her mother explained that little girls have to go to bed on Christmas Eve and get lots of rest so that they can get up early to open up all their presents in the morning. Sophia insisted that everyone has to go to church on Christmas Eve, whether they like it or not. Dora told Sophia that she was just too young to go to church on Christmas Eve, but if she was a good girl, she would take her to church in the morning. Sophia just smiled at Dora and Beth as though they had no idea what they were talking about. And then she went into the hallway to look for her shoes. Dora went after her and tried to explain that there wouldn't be any children at the late night service. Despite Dora and Beth's best efforts, Sophia was determined to see the baby be born. Beth wasn't. She was beginning to lose her temper with her daughter, and she loudly proclaimed that Sophia was just too little to stay up this late. Sophia argued that if the baby Jesus could go to church, she could go because she was much older than any tiny baby. Unable to argue with Sophia's wisdom, Dora helped her goddaughter put on her shoes, and Beth bundled her up in her coat. Old Zeb, who had been quietly watching all this, asked if there was room for one more. Dora looked at his wheelchair and explained that the whole thing might be just a little bit much for him. She suggested that they drop him off on their way to church at his house. But Zeb whined just like Sophia when he said that he would really like to go to church this year. Dora insisted that the service would be packed and that the church wasn't really equipped to handle his wheelchair. Besides, the cold night air might be too much for him. It might make him sick. Zeb said that he would rather get sick and die in church than just drop off at home in front of the TV. Little Sophia told them all not to worry because she would take care of Zeb and he could sit beside her. So Dora and Beth bundled Zeb up against the extreme cold and struggled to get both their passengers safely tucked into Dora's car. Behind the wheel, Dora couldn't help wondering what was happening to what was supposed to be her perfect Christmas Eve. None of this was going according to plan. By the time they arrived at church, the parking lot was full, so they had to park on the street. As Dora struggled to get Zeb out of the car and into his wheelchair, Sophia urged her to hurry up because she wanted to sit up in the front, right beside baby Jesus. When they finally reached the entrance to the church, someone was waiting for Dora. It was the last person Dora ever expected to see anywhere near the church. Her father smiled at her in the way that told Dora that he had indulged in his usual amount of Christmas cheer. He gave Dora a big hug and announced that he had come to church for her. Isn't this a nice surprise? There she stood, on the verge of having her family secret revealed to the good people of the church. So much for her dreams of a perfect Christmas. Dora was being led by a child who should be at home in bed, pushing an old man who was probably going to die from the cold, and trying hard to pretend that she was actually happy to see her father, who looked a little too merry for his own good. Before Dora could object to her father's presence, little Sophia took him by the hand and proceeded to march him into the church and right up to the very front of the church. In all her years of attending the Lutheran Church, Dora had never, ever ventured up to sit in the front row. She looked longingly at her usual spot in the back of the church. But Sophia was proudly leading them to the front row. Sophia wanted to be as close to the baby Jesus as she could get. And Dora had no choice but to push old Zeb in beside her dad. They were quite a motley little crew, and Dora was convinced that none of them, except perhaps Beth, actually belonged in church. Sophia was far too young and far too fidgety. Zeb was too old and too shabby. Her dad was too drunk, and Dora was too frightened. All Dora could do was worry that Sophia was going to distract the people, or Zeb was going to get sick and possibly die right there and then. But most of all, Dora was afraid that her dad would be exposed as a drunk in the midnight choir. It was anything but perfect. It wasn't the perfect Christmas Eve that Dora had hoped for. As the congregation began to sing, "O Come All Ye Faithful," Dora looked up at the nativity set that had been carefully arranged at the foot of the altar. She remembered how enthusiastically Sophia had announced that the baby that was born was God. We simply do not expect to find God in the muck or the mire of a stable. Somehow the setting is all wrong, far too ordinary for the creator of all that is and ever shall be. A manger is too common to embrace divinity. Straw is too abrasive to caress the source of all being. The animals stink too much and are far too noisy to be tolerated in the presence of the one who is, was, and evermore shall be, the love that is God. Perhaps only the angel's song is up to the task of heralding the birth of love among us. The rest of the cast of characters are not fit for a night that is supposed to be perfect. Shepherds are too crude, the carpenter is too rough, and as for the mother of the child, well, she's too young for the task. Who in their wildest dreams could have come up with a story as mad as this? Who could have been so audacious as to suggest that the one we call God comes to us as a helpless child? Long before the preacher ever got around to proclaiming how perfect a night Christmas Eve is, Dora began to realize just how full of wonder Christmas Eve actually is. Sophia couldn't take her eyes off the baby Jesus, and in no time at all, she lay sleeping in Dora's father's arms. Old Zeb, he sang like a man who knew that he might never get another chance to sing on Christmas Eve. As for Dora's dad, well, he may indeed have had too much to drink, but he did come to church in an effort to please his daughter, and he sure didn't let her down. From somewhere in the recesses of his own childhood memories, Dora's father reached back to his days in a long-ago choir to find just the right notes to sing praise to the one who is love. And suddenly, in the midst of such a motley heavenly host, Dora remembered just how much she loved her father, despite his imperfections. Because after all, her father loved her, despite her own imperfections. Filled with love, Dora raised her own voice in praise of the love that is born over and over and over again and again and again. In the words of Sophia, a perfect baby is born, and that baby is God. Christmas is a time to do the baby and yourself a favor and forget about your carefully made plans or best intentions. All that really needs to be done is to reach into the imperfect nativity scene and take the baby into your arms. At Christmas, God, who is love, comes to us and blurs the distinctions between sacred and the ordinary. Let the boundaries that limit our vision fall away. On this holy night, look closely and see visions of the love which is the source of all reality, the love that many of us call God. For love has come as one of us, so that we might become one with the love that is God, so that we might be the gift of love that our world longs for. On this holy night, may love be born.